I didn't wake up one morning planning to tear apart an entire parking lot, but I sure as hell went to bed knowing I was going to do it. See, about 3 months before that, I owned 3 quiet acres of land right off a busy stretch of highway. Nothing fancy, just open ground I'd been holding on to since the late 90s. Kind of like a long game investment. You know, something you sit on until the timing feels right. And for over 2 decades, nobody touched it. Nobody questioned it. Nobody even pretended it wasn't mine. The boundary lines were crystal clear, surveyed, recorded, stamped, filed. The whole deal. The kind of paperwork that makes lawyers smile and neighbors behave. Right next to me sat this old service station. Nothing glamorous. Just a place truckers would pull into for gas, snacks, maybe a quick break. And for years the owners there respected the line like it was sacred. They never crossed it, never pushed it, never even asked. We had an unspoken agreement, the kind of quiet understanding that keeps things simple. Then came Brandon Keller. Now Brandon didn't arrive like a problem, not at first. First time I met him, I was out mowing along the edge of my property, sun beating down, just another normal day, and he pulls up in this polished SUV, steps out with a smile that felt just a little too practiced, you know the kind, friendly, but calculated. He introduced himself, said he'd just bought the station next door, and within about 30 seconds, he casually asked if I'd ever consider selling my land. I told him no. Simple, direct, no wiggle room. He nodded like he respected that, smiled again, said something like, "Hey, doesn't hurt to ask," then got back in his car and drove off. And honestly, I didn't think about him again, not for a while. Then 9 weeks later, everything changed. I was driving past my property like I had done hundreds of times before, just a quick glance out the window, habit more than anything. And that's when my brain kind of short-circuited for a second, because what I saw didn't make sense. I hit the brakes so hard I nearly got rear-ended. Half my land was gone, or at least, it looked like it was gone. In its place was a freshly paved asphalt parking lot, clean edges, bright yellow striping, brand new curbs, tall light poles already wired up, even a big sign advertising additional parking available. And it wasn't empty either. No, it was packed. Trucks, RVs, trailers, like it had been there for years, like it belonged there. I just sat there for a minute, engine running, staring at it, trying to process how something that insane could even happen. Then I grabbed my phone and called Brandon. He picked up on the second ring, like he was expecting me. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You paved a parking lot on my property." There was a pause, not long, just enough to tell me he already knew exactly what I was talking about. "Yeah," he said, casual as ever. "We needed overflow parking. Your land was just sitting there. Just sitting there." That phrase stuck with me. Like somehow the fact that I wasn't actively using it gave him permission to take it. "You need to remove it," I told him. "All of it." Immediately. And that's when his tone shifted. Not loud, not aggressive, just colder. "Look," he said, "I put about 40 grand into that lot. It's helping my business. If you want, we can work out some kind of lease arrangement." A lease. Like he was doing me a favor. "No," I said. And I remember this part clearly because my hands were shaking a little, not from fear, just from the sheer audacity of it. "You don't get to lease something you took without permission. Tear it out." And that's when the mask dropped. "If you've got a problem," he said, voice flat now, "take it to court." Click. That was it. No apology, no hesitation, no attempt to fix anything. Just a challenge. So yeah, I took it to court. But here's the thing nobody tells you about situations like this. It doesn't feel real at first. You keep expecting someone to step in and say there's been a mistake, that it'll all get sorted out with a quick conversation, maybe a handshake. But instead, it gets messy. I hired an attorney, a sharp one, named Karen Mitchell, and she didn't even need a full day to confirm what we already knew. She pulled the surveys, walked the land, took photos, documented everything, and she looked at me and said, "This isn't a gray area. This is trespassing. Clear cut. That should have been the end of it, right?" Wrong. Karen sent Brandon a formal demand letter, 10 days to remove the asphalt, restore the land, fix the damage. Straightforward, professional, by the book. His response? A law firm out of Boise sent back an offer to buy my land, for about half of what it was worth. And their reasoning? The parking lot had increased its value. That was the moment it really clicked for me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Brandon didn't think he was in the wrong. He thought he was going to win. And the worst part? He kept using the lot. Every day, trucks rolling in and out, engines idling, oil dripping into the ground, RVs parking overnight. At one point, I even saw someone dumping waste near the edge, like it was some kind of rest stop. I called him again, told him this was getting worse, told him he needed to stop before it spiraled even further. He laughed. Actually laughed. My lawyer says the longer it's in use, he said, the better my position gets. That's when I realized this wasn't just arrogance. This was strategy. And suddenly, this wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It was a fight. Now let me pause the story for a second, because this right here, this is where things go from crazy neighbor drama to something a lot more calculated. And if you don't understand what's happening under the surface, you're already losing. According to standard procedure, property disputes like this don't just hinge on who feels right. They hinge on documentation, timelines, and intent. And Brandon? He was playing a longer game than it looked like. From a legal perspective, what he was hinting at on that phone call was something called adverse possession. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been around enough real estate deals to know the basics. It's essentially a doctrine that allows someone to claim ownership of land if they use it openly, continuously, and without the owner stopping them for a certain period of time. Sounds insane, right? Like how can someone just use your property into owning it? But that's the law in a lot of places, with very specific conditions. And here's the key part. Time and silence are everything. If you don't push back, if you don't enforce your rights, it can actually weaken your position over time. This is a psychological trap a lot of property owners fall into. You hesitate. You try to be reasonable. You assume things will work themselves out. Meanwhile, the other side is building a case, not just physically, but legally. Every truck that parked there, every day that passed, every moment I didn't act fast enough, it could have been used against me. And Brandon knew that. He wasn't just pouring asphalt. He was testing boundaries, seeing if I'd fold, if I'd delay, if I'd second-guess myself. Because once you hesitate in a situation like this, you're not just giving ground physically. You're giving it legally too. All right, now back to what happened next. So after that call, after that little insight into what he thought he was doing, everything shifted for me. This wasn't about being patient anymore. It wasn't about hoping he'd come to his senses. This was about moving faster than him, cleaner than him, and making sure there was no legal daylight for him to slip through. Karen filed the lawsuit almost immediately. No delays, no back-and-forth games, just straight to it. And while that process was grinding forward, Brandon kept operating like nothing had happened. Trucks still rolling in, diesel engines humming all night, headlights sweeping across what used to be my quiet stretch of land, and every time I drove past it felt like I was watching someone live in my house while I stood outside holding the deed. Weeks went by like that. Not long in real time, but long enough for frustration to start turning into something sharper, something more focused. Karen kept me grounded, though. She'd say things like, "Let the system work," and "We're building a clean case." And she was right, because when the court date finally came, everything moved faster than I expected. We stood in front of Judge Harrison Cole, older guy, calm, the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to control a room. And you could tell within the first 10 minutes that he wasn't impressed. Karen laid it all out, surveys, timelines, photos, documentation, so clean it practically told the story by itself. Brandon's attorney tried to argue improvement of unused land, tried to float that same idea about long-term use, but the judge cut through it like it was noise. He flipped through the file, asked a couple of very direct questions, then leaned back and said something that stuck with me. Ownership doesn't expire because someone else finds a way to profit from it. And just like that, the decision came down. The entire parking lot, every inch of asphalt, every pole, every sign, was confirmed to be on my property. Brandon had no legal right to build it, no claim to keep it, no argument to stand on. The court gave him 21 days to remove everything and restore the land. And if he didn't, I was authorized to do it myself, at his expense. Now you'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think a clear court order would snap someone back to reality. But Brandon, he doubled down. Day 1 passed, nothing changed. Day 5, still full. Day 10, trucks everywhere. Day 21. It looked exactly the same as the day before the ruling. Cars parked like the land had always been his, like the court order was just a suggestion. That's when something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not emotional, just resolved. Day 22. I showed up before sunrise. The air was cold, still dark, that kind of early morning where everything feels paused, and then the convoy rolled in. Demolition crew, jackhammers, a compact excavator, a line of dump trucks stretching down the access road. We had permits, we had documentation, we had the sheriff notified ahead of time, so there wouldn't be any surprises. And Karen was there too, standing off to the side with a clipboard, documenting every second like this was evidence in a documentary. We blocked off the entrances, cleared the vehicles, and then we started. The first crack of the jackhammer echoed across the lot like a gunshot, sharp, final, and once it started, it didn't stop. Asphalt split open in jagged lines, chunks lifting, breaking, collapsing in on themselves. And there's something surreal about watching something that was built to look permanent just come apart that easily. By mid-morning, the clean black surface was already turning into a patchwork of rubble, dust rising into the air, the neat painted lines disappearing under fractures and debris. By noon, the light poles were coming down. Metal cut, wiring pulled, foundations exposed and ripped out like weeds. The excavator moved in next, clawing through the gravel base underneath, tearing it up layer by layer, undoing weeks of construction in hours. Dump trucks lined up, filled, pulled out, came back empty, over and over again, a steady rhythm of destruction and removal. And then, right on cue, Brandon showed up. He came out of the station fast, like he'd just realized what was happening, face already red, arms waving, shouting before he even got close enough for anyone to hear him clearly. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he yelled, voice cracking between anger and panic. I walked over, calm, holding a copy of the court order. "You had 21 days, I said, handing it to him. "This is day 22. He didn't even look at the paper at first, just stared past me at the machines tearing through what used to be his investment. "You're destroying my business," he snapped, like somehow I was the one crossing a line. And that's the thing about people like that. They don't see the boundary until it pushes back. "This isn't your business," I told him, nodding toward the rubble. "It's my land." He grabbed the order finally, skimmed it, shaking his head like if he just disagreed hard enough it would rewrite itself. But the machines didn't care, the crew didn't stop, and neither did I. By sunset, the lot was unrecognizable. The smooth asphalt was gone, replaced with broken chunks stacked and hauled away. The poles were history, the signage ripped out, and underneath it all, the ground was being leveled back to what it had been before he ever touched it. Less than 48 hours later, it was over. 8 full truckloads of debris gone. The surface flattened, cleaned, stripped back down to bare earth. No paint, no lines, no illusion of ownership, just land again. Mine. But Brandon wasn't done. Not even close. A couple weeks later, he filed a lawsuit against me, claimed I'd destroyed his property, demanded compensation for the construction costs, lost business revenue, even threw in emotional distress for good measure, like watching consequences unfold was somehow traumatic. And honestly, part of me expected that. People who push that far don't usually stop cleanly, they escalate. But when it went back in front of the judge, it didn't take long. The case got dismantled piece by piece, same way the parking lot did. The court didn't just reject his claims, it flipped them. He was ordered to cover my legal fees. He was ordered to pay for the demolition costs. And because of the contamination from all that vehicle use, oil, fluids, waste seeped into the soil, he was also on the hook for remediation. All in, it wasn't just a loss. It was a collapse. And standing there after all of it, looking at the land back to what it was supposed to be, I realized something. This whole thing could have ended with a simple conversation, a simple no, respected. But instead, he turned it into a war. And he lost. So yeah, that's how it ended, at least on paper, land restored, court satisfied. Invoices paid by the guy who thought he could outmaneuver the system. But if you think the real story here is just guy builds a legal parking lot and loses, you're missing the part that actually matters. Because what happened out there on those 3 acres? That wasn't just about dirt and asphalt. It was about boundaries, the kind you can measure with survey markers, and the kind people test when they think no one's paying attention. The lesson here is, people don't usually start with something that big. They don't wake up and say, "I'm going to take half of someone else's property today." It starts smaller, a question, a favor, a casual suggestion. Hey, you're not using that, right? And if that gets even a hint of hesitation, that's where the line begins to blur. What I didn't realize at the time was that first conversation with Brandon. That wasn't just a friendly inquiry. It was reconnaissance. He wanted to know how firm my no really was, whether I'd waffle, whether I'd leave room for negotiation later. When I didn't, he didn't walk away. He just changed tactics. And that ties into something bigger, something you see not just in property disputes, but in HOA conflicts, neighbor disagreements, even workplace dynamics. Control isn't always taken outright. Sometimes it's tested first. This is a psychological trap, and it's a sneaky one, because it plays on your desire to be reasonable. You think, maybe I'm overreacting, or let's just talk it out. And while you're trying to keep things civil, the other person is quietly pushing the boundary further and further. By the time you realize what's happening, you're not dealing with a question anymore. You're dealing with a situation. From a legal perspective, the biggest mistake you can make in something like this is hesitation. Not because you're wrong, but because the system doesn't reward passivity. Documentation, timing, enforcement, those are the pillars. If I had waited longer, if I had let that lot operate for months or years without taking action, Brandon's argument, no matter how ridiculous it sounded, could have gained traction. Not because it was right, but because it was consistent. And consistency, legally speaking, can sometimes look a lot like legitimacy if nobody challenges it. According to standard procedure, once a boundary violation is confirmed, the response needs to be immediate and documented. That doesn't mean you go out there swinging a sledgehammer on day one. It means you establish a record. You notify, you file, you create a paper trail so clean that when it lands in front of a judge, there's no ambiguity left to interpret. That's what saved me here. Not anger, not stubbornness, structure. But there's another layer to this too, ego. Because if you look at Brandon's decisions from the outside, they don't make a lot of sense. He had multiple off-ramps. He could have stopped after the first call, could have responded to the demand letter, could have complied with the court order. Any one of those would have limited the damage. Instead, he doubled down every single time. Why? Because backing down would have meant admitting he was wrong. And for some people, that's more expensive than losing money. That's something you see all the time in HOA disputes, by the way. Someone builds a fence 6 inches over the line, gets called out, and instead of fixing it, they argue, escalate, file complaints, drag it out for months. Not because they can win, but because they can't stand losing. And ironically, that need to not lose is exactly what makes them lose bigger. The lesson here is, know your lines, and don't be afraid to enforce them. That doesn't make you difficult, it doesn't make you aggressive. It makes you clear. And clarity is something a lot of people count on you not having. They expect hesitation. They expect compromise. They expect you to second-guess yourself just long enough for them to gain ground. And if you're on the other side of this, if you're the one thinking about cutting a corner, bending a rule, just using something that isn't technically yours, understand this. Short-term gain can turn into long-term consequences real fast. What looked like a $40,000 investment for Brandon turned into a much bigger loss once everything played out. Not just financially, but reputationally too. Because word gets around, especially in business. At the end of the day, this wasn't really about revenge, and it wasn't about proving a point. It was about restoring balance. Something was taken, the system addressed it, and it got put back the way it should have been. Simple in theory, messy in reality. But I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have handled it the same way? Or would you have tried to negotiate, maybe taken the lease offer, avoided the fight altogether? And what about Brandon? Do you think he actually believed he could win? Or was he just too deep in to turn back? Drop your thoughts below, because stories like this, they're never just about land.